Red Cave Podcast, Volume 22. Reading tonight from Tales from the Cracks, episodes 67 through 69. Starting with Inside the Maze of My Mind, Part 1, and followed by Inside the Maze of My Mind, Parts 2 and 3. Lie close, Laura said, pricking up her golden head. We must not look at goblin men. We must not buy their fruits. Who knows upon what soil they fed their hungry, thirsty roots? Come by, call the goblins, hobbling down the glen. Christine Rossetti. Inside the Maze of My Mind. It all began with one stumbling trek into the desert. My crew and I were around Carrington, Nevada, tripping off mushrooms and an arguable amount of Jack Daniels. Stephen pulled his car over to the side of the road when Jimmy announced he had to piss. I remember standing there next to the hood, glancing at the bobbing hula girl on the dash, and grooving to my own trip there in the middle of the night. Then I saw something. It was crossing the road in front of me. I lumbered forward across the desert floor, sprinting away from the parked car. I remember looking over my shoulder once, the car only a toy in the distance. What I saw was a wolf, far more than 7 feet tall. Its paws were as big as tires, fangs the size of piano keys protruding from the black hole of its mouth. It wasn't chasing me like I thought. It was standing there between me and my friends, pivoting its head back and forth several times. It had green eyes that seemed to gleam like glass marbles. They watched me carefully. I darted through the bitter darkness, brush and cacti tugging at my pant cuffs. The icy hand of the wind enveloped me with its long fingers. I felt the night become considerably dimmer, as if a curtain had been pulled across my eyes. I never looked back, but it didn't stop me from seeing the wolves. They were everywhere, laid out in front of my path or sitting in the trees. They darted out in front of me when I least expected it and howled inches from my ears. Colors started to swim before my eyes, and I realized that sounds cliché. There were colors. The night sky was a screen of them. I blacked out more than once, and some of the night is missing. I might have imagined this next part, but I'm only telling you what I saw. Enormous beasts that sure looked like wolves trapped me in a tight circle. I was in the middle of a pack of snarling, barking creatures. They all had to be the size of sports cars. I kid you not. Enormous heads bent down toward me, their hot breath steaming my face. Meaty tongues snaked between gaping jowls hanging across hairy necks. All of them pounced at once, and I became lost in a jungle of fur. When I woke up the next morning, my face was in a thistle of weeds and my head was ringing. I lifted my head into blistering sunlight, tiny thorns coming away with my face. Blood trickled down my cheek, and I had to pull a tangled weed out of my hair. I realized that the pricks were also in my forehead and mouth. I had to softly suck on the prickly mess in my cheek until it was soggy enough to spit out. I got most of it, but I did have to pluck a few needles from my tongue. I was so confused, I didn't know what to do. That morning I wasn't entirely sure what had just happened to me, yet I had an idea. It was always the same. When I take magic mushrooms or acid, I always see the same thing. I see wolves every blessed time. They usually just pop up for a minute or two, only watching, never hurting me. Then they're gone, even if they just dodge behind a box in my basement. Why had I raced out into the desert after midnight? What had I seen? Had I seen the wolves? I had a terrible hangover that split down the middle of my head like a railroad spike. I remembered a road trip to San Francisco, the trip I'd been looking forward to for a year. I remembered taking an eighth of magic mushrooms in the back of Jimmy's Ford. I remembered drinking from our cooler of beer and pulling over to the side of the road. Then I suddenly saw myself in the desert, running from a wolf larger than I was. I remember its green marble eyes. Some trip, I said, wiping the beads of sweat from my brow. It had to be, but I really had no clue. I looked at the patch of weeds I'd fallen into. They had long stems reaching upward like gaunt arms, with bluish-gray growths. Long thorns protruded from the growth, each about a centimeter wide and half a millimeter thick. I was surprised that, when I'd fallen, I hadn't poked both my damn eyes out. I bent down to further inspect the plant, and was amazed to find there were a vast field of weeds stretched out as far as I could see. So I started my trek into the desert, calling Stephen and Jim's names with little hope. I can even remember crying. I stumbled aimlessly through the desert, a gash across my cheek I hardly felt, and a cut on the outside of my tongue that pulsed with waves of pain. Why didn't I bring my fucking phone? I cried through a stream of tears. I remembered placing my cell phone in the change holder of Stephen's car. What happened next had no warning or explanation. It seemed to turn on like a light switch in my head. A strange sensation came over me. It can best be described as plunging into a pool on a hot summer's day. My skin started to prickle, my spine vibrating within me like a plucked cord. The world became a swirling mess. The sun was gone and everything seemed like it was under shade. A gusty wind hit me in the same moment, thrusting me backward. I broke out into a sweat, the hairs on my head itching crazily. My hearing was blotted out, and all I could discern was a dull whine. Clouds expanded and deflated above my head. Cacti waved at me frantically, their meaty arms punching out at the air. Never before had I felt so uncomfortable, so vulnerable to the outside world. I must be having some next-day reaction to those shrooms, I thought, but the feeling was so strange and out of place. I tried to walk and the ground sunk under me like putty. My head spun, my arms twirling at my sides, begging for balance. Then I started hearing voices. Voices I didn't want to hear. They knew something I didn't. "Mariel the Martian went tiptoeing through town," one of the voices said in a hushed whisper, as if it were some secret only I was to hear. "Mariel the Martian walked west without a sound," another voice said. Never before had I realized how many people lived inside one man. In my case, there were thousands. And that day in the desert, they all had something to say. "Mariel the Martian fell ill with fever. Mariel the Martian with a meat cleaver." "Shut up, shut up," I thought desperately, and like a roar of thunder, the voices replied with cackling laughter. The world swirled and swayed, the color draining. I stood before a picture-perfect landscape, as though I were staring into a window smeared with clouds and an extending desert. Beyond the window I could see a winding hallway, lighted with hanging fluorescent bulbs. I was mesmerized by the lights, and I made my way closer. I placed my palms against the picture and touched cold glass. It was a window. There was a sheet of glass separating me from the hallway, separating me from the beautiful glowing lights. I pushed and it slid easily on its tracks. Once it was open, a hot burst of air struck me in the face. "The Mariel window can't be closed," another alien voice replied. "What may creep in? No one knows." I stepped into the hallway and set foot on plush green carpet. I twirled around to see there was no window behind me, only a wall covered in faded yellow wallpaper. Doors lined each side of the hallway, stretching as far as my eye could see. I studied one of the doors, noticing that the first started at number 001. They all looked fairly old and warped with age, the numbers fading. I walked down the never-ending hallway. I passed door 012, door 020, and then door 045. I started to wonder where the stairs or elevators were. When I finally reached door 100, I became very annoyed. How could a building have so many rooms on one floor? It made no sense. At room 100, I jiggled the doorknob and found it unlocked. I threw open the door, and what I saw sent me reeling back against the far wall. Beyond the door was a cracked country road. Cool wind hit me in the face, and I could even see the family farm in the distance, exactly as I last remembered. My childhood dog, Peter, was lying in the center of the road, still breathing. Blood pooled out around him, and red tire tracks led away from the gruesome scene. My 5-year-old self huddled next to him, sobbing and stroking his neck softly. Then Peter's chest fell and never rose again. I screamed inside the hallway, throwing all my weight back into the door, which slammed shut in a spray of ancient dust. I sat there against the door, fresh tears pouring down my face. What is this place? Where am I? "The Mariel Motel," an alien voice replied promptly. "What is Mariel?" "What the hell do you mean?" I shouted angrily. No answer. "I just want to get back to my friends. That's all I want," I screamed from the floor. "Door 5823, the same voice replied. "What?" "Room 5823. I then began to sprint down the hall, mind racing. After what seemed like hours of running, I spotted door number 5823. Next to the door was a wall, indicating the dead end I was waiting for. On the wall was a familiar window, shut tight. "Should I go into room 5823? Is that what you want me to do?" I asked the voices. Silence. "Why find this door?" I asked. "Because the window back is always next to the last door. It's always next to the last memory," yet another said. I turned to face door 5823 and saw that it was much newer than the other doors I'd passed along the hall. When I touched the black numbers on the door, my fingers came away with fresh paint. My freshest memory. I went to open it, but an image of the monstrous wolf popped into my head. My hand tore away from the doorknob as if it were red hot. The voices began to laugh again, creating a horrid orchestra of noise that bounced around the hallway like so many rubber balls. Among them were the howls of the wolves, looming closer with every hurried breath I took. I even thought I could hear the enormous paws plopping down on the carpet, their nails leaving jagged slashes in the shag. I turned toward the window. It had to be afternoon. The glare was that terrific. I placed my palms on the glass and I laughed triumphantly at the soft warmth. I heaved it open, grinning in the impenetrable light. A breeze wafted over me as I dove forward out of Mariel Motel and back into the beyond. There was a startling sensation of free falling head over heels, and then I was looking up at the sky with my own eyes. I was lying on the side of the road, the same road I'd fled from the night before. Had my body gone into autopilot? How had I found the road? When I regained my feet, terrible bolts of pain locked my knees, making me stagger. With further examination, I saw that it was late afternoon, and I wasn't surprised to see that my skin was badly sunburned. The cuts on my face weren't too deep, not enough for stitches. I remembered the strange weed I'd fallen into, and all those sharp thorns. Then the memory of the wolves hit me hard between the eyes, and the Mariel Motel soon followed. There had been a hallway, doors all along my left and right side. I could recall a number 5823 and an open window. There was a roar of a car engine and a series of progressive honks. I spun around to see Stevens Ford Explorer speed into view a few miles down the road, and it was headed for me. Thank the Lord. Two concerned friends picked me up and herded me into a diner. There I was filled full of deep-fried grease, which I enjoyed a little too much. I tried to describe to them my encounter with the wolves the night before. I was last seen leaning up against the trunk of the car as Jimmy relieved his bladder only yards away. Stephen was behind the wheel, busy inspecting the baggie he'd saved, concealing 2 mushroom caps and a couple of fresh stems. Stephen was often found relishing over his stash whenever he had a chance. Jesus, Red, it was insane, Stephen insisted, taking a sloppy bite from his plump burger. A dollop of ketchup spotted the counter unnoticed. I looked up for 1 second to see you gone. I ran out and Jimmy was standing there in the ditch, dick in hand, just tripping like a madman. I could see that he had no clue where you were. I just blacked out, I guess, Jimmy said distantly, sipping from his beer. He had a faded baseball cap pushed down over his blonde mop of hair. He had smears of dirt under his eyes and along his cheekbones. His clothes looked almost as dirty as my own. He didn't have sunburned skin like me, but was tanner all the same. They'd been searching for me all night. I get real relaxed when I'm pissing. He offered me a smile that I returned. What the hell happened to you out there, Red? Your clothes are torn apart, as if you were actually attacked by... I knew Stephen meant to say wolves, but something stopped him. He saw how freaked out I was. He saw that the wolves were my fear, my weakness. I believe that every person has something like that branded into their minds, some fear that is always there and never leaves. It represents what we all dread: death, change. Stephen ran a dirt-encrusted hand across his sweaty locks. His tie-dye shirt was smeared with mud, and new holes had sprouted in his mangy jeans. I hope what you saw out there in the desert wasn't as bad as what we saw. It can't be that bad. I watched him dumbfounded. Stephen regarded me with a shaky gaze. Do you know who Mariel is? Stephen asked. He forgot his burger and selected a toothpick instead. He put on his shades and leaned across the table, his hair grazing my plate. Mariel? I asked, stupidly, avoiding my friend's eye contact. No, I've never heard that name before. I don't know why I lied. I guess I didn't want to add to his anxiety, though it sure added to mine. Thought so. We were way too stoned, Stephen said. He plopped back into his booth, a little disappointed. I told you, Jim. It was all in our heads. Jimmy turned toward Stephen sharply, his lips quivering. How could it? He challenged. We both heard the voice. How could it be in our heads if we both heard it? He was gripping the edge of the table a little too hard. Why? What did you guys hear? I asked. Stephen looked around quickly, eyes scanning the length of the restaurant. It was probably nothing, Red, but we followed your tracks into the desert. We followed them for some time. You really traveled, he began with a small chuckle. We were calling your name over and over, screaming our fucking guts out. We started seeing some crazy shit, and I have to say, I didn't hate it, Jimmy chimed in, all the worry gone from his face. He had just turned his baseball cap around, revealing 2 bright blue eyes. I saw a lot of colors. The plants around me were waving like there was a hurricane raging. Yeah, it was some experience, Stephen added thoughtfully. Maybe something worth trying again. Jimmy cracked a smile, showing off his crooked teeth. I have to say, that idea scared the hell out of me at first, but I was able to wave it aside. I wanted to learn more about the voice and how they came to know the name Mariel. Anyway, the trip was pretty cool, but there was someone talking, or whispering almost, Stephen said with a furrowed brow. He scratched his head, trying to remember the midnight encounter. I couldn't hear a lot of what the voice was saying, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was like it was all around us, almost like it was coming out of the very desert, Jimmy said. And the funny thing is, the voice sounded a lot like yours, Red. I studied Jimmy carefully and saw the fear creeping into his face. Call us crazy, man, but it did sound a lot like you, said Stephen. We called back, but the voice never really answered to your name. It talked to us, but not until we asked it what its name was. Let me guess. It was Mariel, I replied. Bingo. Did it say anything else? I asked the guy if he saw you around, Jimmy said. I described you and everything, and it didn't say anything back for a while. When the guy finally did reply, he said he'd seen you. I gulped, and they noticed. The guy said you were checking in for the night, Stephen concluded. I gulped again, remembering the motel and its many doors. That was probably all in our head, Stephen once more insisted, though I could tell he didn't believe a word of it. We lost your tracks somehow, and you can probably blame my short attention span, Jimmy said. The voice never said anything else? I asked. Nope, we even tried getting its attention, but it was gone, Stephen explained. We turned around and finally found the road and had to walk 2 miles up to find the car. We hoped you were there, but we're sorry, Red. Hey, it's my fault, I said. We got into the car and slept it off, hoping we'd find you in the morning. Shit, we searched and searched. It was a pretty crazy night, no doubt about it, I said. You guys will think this is crazy, but I really want to know what you think. Try us, Jimmy said, leaning forward in interest. I explained how I'd woken up in a thistle of mysterious weeds, and how I had to pull the thorns out of my mouth and hair. Then I began to feel my body peak, as if it was having some last-minute reaction to the shrooms, but I've never felt like that before. It was like I was under some spell, I concluded. I didn't tell them about the window that appeared before me, and the long hallway that ran behind it. And I certainly didn't tell my friends about the voices in my head, which told me it was the Mariel Motel. It must have been the weed you found, Jimmy almost screamed. I looked at him stupidly. I mean, it cut you open, and you sucked on it before pulling it out of your mouth, Jimmy exclaimed. You must have stumbled upon some new psychedelic plant, like the peyote cactus, Stephen added with a creeping smile. Damn, Red, you have to bring us back there, Stephen insisted. I don't remember where they were. I blacked out and woke up on the side of the road, I said. It wouldn't hurt to look. I bet they're growing everywhere, and Red knows what they look like, Stephen suggested. We could find them. You guys, I don't think we should, I said. We wanted it to make it to Jamestown by nightfall. Come on, Red. We have a cooler full of beer and enough magic fungus to last us the rest of the day. We can just get the check, pull off to the side of the road, and do some hunting, Stephen replied. I still don't know. Tell me, Red, Jimmy said, rearranging his battered cap. What did it really feel like? I thought it over and nodded with satisfaction. It felt like my body was in some kind of fever, in a carnival of lights and sounds. Fever. That's a nice name, Jimmy said. If it's as cool as you say, we could sell it. We could call it Fever. Now that scared me. He gave the plant a name. That made it suddenly very real. Mariel the Martian fell ill with fever. Mariel the Martian with a meat cleaver. I hung my head as a bolt of fresh pain reeled through. I massaged my brow vigorously, Jimmy and Stephen exchanging hopeful words. Those voices, they're silent. But for how long? I wondered. Did any of the voices belong to Mariel? I didn't think so, because my voices were talking about Mariel, as if to warn me. Why is it the Mariel Motel? What does this thing have to do with me? And how does the fever fit into all this? My voices were trying to warn me about the fever too. But what had they meant when they referred to Mariel as a Martian? Questions. Nothing but unanswered questions. Jack, Jimmy announced. Ready, Red? Stephen asked, getting up from the booth. I only sat there with my head in my hands. The Mariel window can't be closed. What may creep in, no one knows. Does the Mariel Motel even belong to me? Anymore? Inside the Maze of My Mind, Part 2. I don't remember, I announced in annoyance. I sat in the back seat of Stephen's car, absently flicking a lighter between my shaking fingers. My mind kept going back to the hallway. I couldn't even begin to imagine what other horrible memories were behind those doors. That's why they're closed. I'm not meant to open them. Let's forget this whole thing, I said, but Jimmy and Steve weren't listening. Come on, Red, this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He pulled his cap tight over his head until his eyes were concealed by the brim. We could be like Tim Leary, man. We could start a whole new psychedelic revolution based on fever. Yeah, tune in, tune on, drop down, Stephen added from the driver's seat. I didn't even like it that much, I said. We're going back to where we stopped last night, and then we'll go from there, Stephen explained. How do you know where the spot is, I asked. We parked by a sign that read, Park County 20 miles. Stephen absently flicked the hula girl on his dashboard. I could only nod my head along with the girl. So, what do you say, Red? You still in? Jimmy asked. He patted me hurriedly on the back. I don't think I was ever in, but we'll take that as a yes, Stephen cracked from the front. Let's hurry, though. I don't want to be out there after dark, I negotiated. It was close to 3 o'clock at the time, and I was beginning to have my doubts. I had absolutely no idea how long it took for me to wander into the patch of fever weeds. On mushrooms, time seemed to stretch and warp into a murky film reel. We need to be back before then. Jimmy watched me behind his stained bill. You're probably right. He sat back in the seat and shook out a cigarette. I lit it for him and began to play with the lighter again. Here we are, Stephen announced, pointing at a green roadside sign. I turned to read Park County 20 miles. Stephen bowled a quick U-turn and parked along the side of the road, only yards from the sign. We all got out, and right away I could see our familiar shoe prints in the loose sand and dirt. This is the right place, I said, and a wave of fear struck me. The adventure begins, Jimmy pronounced, drawing deeply from his cigarette. Stephen was popping a fresh joint between his lips, motioning for me to light him up. I did so, and he sucked in heavily. He offered it then to me, which I took with much gratitude. If I was going to hike back into that wasteland again, I would need a pick-me-up. Jimmy took it last, and introducing it to the cig already burning between his parched lips. We all exhaled at once, like usual, and gave each other clownish grins. Wait a sec, Jimmy said before reaching into the trunk for the cooler and extracting 2 cool water bottles. With a plump joint alternating between us, we took off into the desert. 2 hours of hiking led us nowhere. The sun bore down on us, and we had already consumed one of the water bottles. Cottonmouth in the desert is no laughing matter. I hung on to the empty bottle just in case there would be an opportunity I could refill it. Jimmy was just about to twist the cap of our last bottle when I smacked his hand swiftly. He nodded and stuck it back into his oversized cargo pocket. Stephen lumbered along behind us, watching his feet. "At least it's not as hot," Stephen said, rubbing at his red skin. I'm sure I had even worse of a sunburn. It was pulsing steadily. I eyed my watch and saw it was 5:30. The sun would be extinguished in the next 20 minutes or so. I realized that we would be in pitch black on the return trip, and my heart skipped a beat. "We haven't even found the plants yet," I whined tiredly. "Should we turn around?" "Oh, shit!" Jimmy screamed in alarm, and Stephen and I jumped where we stood. Jimmy fell back into a thick tangle of brush, his tattered moccasins kicking out into the air. A small tan snake slithered around the bush, disappearing into a hole in the earth. "Did you see the size of that thing?" Jimmy cried as Stephen and I hauled him back to his feet. "It was a big one, all right," Stephen replied with a tired grin. I laughed while Jimmy beat the dust out of his clothes. "This isn't funny, Red," he barked. We continued onward, moving slower than ever. We were all exhausted, but we couldn't turn back. We had come so far, and the mysterious weeds were nowhere to be seen. I doubted we would ever find them. The desert got cooler as the sun made its way into the horizon. The sky blew up in a breathtaking streak of pinks and oranges. Then our supply of heat was gone, and my heart sank with the sun. We huddled close to each other as the chilling wind blew past. I watched our world turn black. Our world is a whole different place at night. Everything changes, and a human brain changes too. We all went under a strange transformation as our eyes adapted to the darkness. Every cactus and tall plant became a dark figure. Every scurrying creature became a stranger following our tracks. We should have turned back. Oh God, why didn't we turn back? Our slow, grueling paces switched to cautious staggers. No longer did we have any sense of direction. All we cared about was staying close to one another. "We need to turn around," Jimmy said, and I sensed real fear in his voice. "I was wrong. I can't do this. I was messed up last night, and my high is gone." "We can't turn around," Stephen replied with a small voice. "Not after all we've gone through." "He's right, Steve," I said, my entire body trembling. "A little farther." That was the end of the subject. No one realizes how fucking dark the desert gets at night. My senses did improve out there. I could make out the black shapes of plants and trees, and I could always notice when there was a giant set of thorn bushes in front of me. Every crack of a branch and every chirp from a grasshopper felt like inches away. There was a squeak from what could have been a shrew or a mouse, the sound of a heavy bird taking flight, and then the sharp howl from a wolf. We stopped dead in our tracks at this, each of us breathing heavily. Wolves aren't native here in Nevada, I thought. Could that have been a coyote? Stephen snapped me a quick glance before continuing. He stopped suddenly and bent down on his knees. "Red, come here and look at this," Stephen insisted. I bent down next to him and leaned close to the plant. I placed a hand on it and felt the tiny prods of its thorns. I also noticed the plant was too leafy. It was a lot bigger than the weed we were looking for. "Is this it? Is this the fever?" Jimmy asked desperately. He wanted this trip to be over just as much as I did. "No," I said simply. "It's a weed, but not ours." "Damn it," Stephen snapped, regaining his feet. I heard his joints crack and pop wildly. "Let's just turn back. I can hardly see out here," I protested. "We're tired, Steve. Let's just call it a night." Stephen turned to me in the black, his eyes like tiny moons. He had his arms crossed, rubbing his bare arms for warmth. I was wearing a hoodie and Jimmy had a sleeved sweatshirt. Stephen wasn't wearing anything but his torn jeans and stained tie-dye shirt. We're close," he announced, his breath clouding out in front of him. "You're freezing, Steve. We're freezing," Jimmy snapped. "Fine. We'll call it a night," he said, and we sighed in relief. "Right here." "What?" I shouted. "We'll camp here in the night and search tomorrow," Stephen replied, sitting against a nearby tree. He bowled his knees in close to his chest and shivered briskly. "I can't sleep here," Jimmy argued. All the same, he sat down next to his friend. "You can't sleep out here either. You'll freeze to death." "It's not that cold." "Cut the bullshit, man. It's 20 degrees out here and getting colder," I remarked. There was a crash behind me, and I turned in time to see a bush shake. I instantly thought of the wolf. "I've heard that a desert can reach 20 below at night," Jimmy replied. "Where'd you hear that?" Stephen challenged. There was another sound behind us, something that sounded like a scratch on a tree trunk. I sat down Indian style in front of Steve and locked eyes with him. "It's over," I said. He only studied my face and nodded. I smiled and got back to my feet. Jimmy helped Stephen up, and we turned away from the tree. We went back the way we came. "I hope we're not lost," Jimmy said. There was a lot of silence between us. We cracked open the second water bottle, and Jimmy and I lent our sweatshirts to Steve for half an hour at a time. I was sorry to be right that it was getting colder. The wind was also harsher, but it was always at our backs. We heard the wolf cry out once more, but it sounded like it was miles behind us. "This was so much different last night, Red," Jimmy said, shattering our silence. There were a lot more things to entertain us yesterday. Do you remember the colors? No one answered him, but he knew we both did. It was 7:45, and still we walked. I swigged from the water bottle and passed it back to Jim to hold. I had dropped my bottle a while ago, maybe even when we took that short break against the tree. My eyes sagged and my knees shook. My feet cried in pain with each short step. Snot ran down my nose, dripping off my chin. Prickly weeds stuck to the cuffs of my pants, and I constantly felt as if snakes were coiling past my ankles. Jesus, I could use another diner burger right about now, Stephen said, and I thought I heard his stomach growl. I heard that, Jimmy agreed. Silence followed for another 40 minutes. When my digital watch told me we were rounding past 9 o'clock, I started to panic. 2 hours had passed since we turned around, which told me we were either walking too slowly or that we were hiking in the wrong direction. We should have reached the road by now, Jimmy cried helplessly. I know, I snapped. We only hiked for 2 hours before we turned back. We should be back to the car. I know, I shot back. So what do we do? I began, but my right foot sank into a dip in the desert floor. My ankle turned and I crumpled to the brush. I cried out as razor-sharp thorns bit into my arm. Stephen and Jimmy ran for my aid and hauled me to my feet. Damn, Rad, are you okay? Jim asked with concern. Yeah, but my arm's all torn up. I inspected my bare arm and saw familiar gray spines sticking out of my skin. What is it? Stephen asked excitedly. I looked down at my feet and realized that the plants were all around us, the stalks growing as tall as our kneecaps. Gray tendrils of growth stretched out like ropey vines, attaching different families together. Red, what the hell are we looking at? I should have lied. I should have pulled out those thorns, told them it was nothing, and walked away. I should have put it all behind me. It's the plant. Right here, all around us, I said. We found it. I shivered, clutching my shoulders in a bear hug. Yeah, Stephen murmured, plucking one of the stalks out of the ground. Using his fingernails, he pulled each spine from the weed. Then he raised it to his lips. Jimmy and I watched Stephen pop the plant to his mouth like a pill. He puckered his cheeks into a sour face as he sucked. When he felt that he had gotten all its worth, he spit the plant onto the dirt, gagging wetly. Then he looked up at us, wiping saliva and tears from his face. It tasted awful, he revealed, spitting once more. Then Jimmy bent down onto his knees and selected his own fever weed. He plucked out the thorns and eyed it with unease. He held it up to his open mouth, much like Stephen, but paused. Come on, Jim, just do it, Stephen prodded. The taste doesn't stay in your mouth. That's not what I'm afraid of, Jim replied, looking at me, his eyes full of caution. You don't have to do this, Jimmy, I said in a cloud of my own breath. Don't tell me I'm going to be the only one to try it, Stephen shouted. No, I will, Jim said. He brought the weed closer to his mouth. It's just... What is it? I asked. I was studying the lines on his face, searching for anything I could understand in his eyes. I did find one thing, and it was curiosity. It's just a new drug, I guess, he said with a shrug. Then he placed the plant on his tongue and locked his teeth. I watched terrified as Jimmy sucked out all the fever's poison. He had a familiar screwed-up face, tears running down his cheek. That-a-boy, Jim, that-a-boy, Steve said with a laugh. He patted his buddy on the back as he spit the disgusting weed on the ground. Jim looked at me with a hint of embarrassment. Maybe this will make things a little more interesting. Come on, Red, join us, Stephen almost commanded. I sighed and reached down. I snagged off a good piece with a trembling hand. I eased the thorns out and I took a deep, raspy breath before placing it on my tongue. No one truly knows how black the desert is at night. When the fever finally kicked in, it felt as if my entire body was weighed down with a heavy blanket. Stephen was the first to experience the trip. His eyes glazed over and his entire body shook. I would have tried to aid him, but he was smiling. There was utter bliss on his face. He was whispering under his breath in hushed murmurs. His hands began to rise up in the air, reaching for some unseen force. I watched Stephen as he began to speak. Jimmy, on the other hand, was getting to his feet, eyes rolled up into the back of his head. Don't you see them, Red? Stephen said sharply. Don't you see the eyes? The responding bark from a wolf resounded over the valley. Jimmy strode over to me, hands reaching out. His eyes were still rolled into whites and a slack grin hung on his face. He was lost in his own mind, much like I was inside the merry old motel. I had a nightmare, Jimmy said in a juvenile voice. I had a nightmare. Can I sleep with you? Jimmy laughed, drool spotting a sweatshirt. Everyone died in my dream. This was a mistake, I said. I sprang to my feet just as the blanket fell over my shoulders. The desert became a brilliant screen of bright colors. My feet began to sink into the earth, the fever plants coming alive around my ankles. Long gray vines uncoiled from their stalks, snapping out at me. My eyes switched to Stephen, who was only a black figure in the colors. He was up on his feet and wandering out into the desert, hands outstretched as if he was a blind man. The lights in the sky swallowed him like a mist. I tried to run after him, but I lost my footing. Everything seemed to drain out of the world as I fell into a tangle of weeds. Vines wrapped around my body, binding my chest to the ground. Fangs bit into my arms. I must have blacked out for a minute, but I remember regaining my feet and resting up against a tree. It squirmed and bucked under my touch, but I ignored it. I tried to reach out for Jim, but he stretched away as if the ground was made of elastic. The colors were more intense, and my breathing became great heaving gasps. Sweat seeped out of every pore in my body, cool trickles running down my sides. "I quit," Jimmy hollered into the night air. His bug eyes were trained on something in the distance only he could see. His hands went to his face, and he screamed bloody murder. I won't forget the way his entire body trembled. I went to aid him, but again fell flat on my face. It felt like I was trying to walk on one of those bouncy castles I used to love as a kid. Jimmy fell on his knees only yards from me, chin on his chest, saliva pouring from his open mouth. His eyes were wide open, but still rolled back. At that moment I thought his eyes were red, and they were staring right at me. "We fell in love in a fever," Jimmy moaned through his mouth full of saliva. "Hotter than a pepper's sprout." Then he started to laugh, spit spraying between his teeth. Jimmy started to crawl toward me on his hands and knees, cackling wickedly. He howled at me, his eyes still rolled back into their whites. How can he see me like that? I thought. I immediately scrambled away from him, his fingers just grazing my ankle. I kicked at him blindly and he howled with rage. Then the lights went out. I don't know which direction I ran, but it wasn't the right way. Just like that first night, I ran into the desert and I was alone. And I was tripping hard. "Red!" I heard Jimmy scream behind me. He sounded distant, his voice only a whisper on the wind. "It's all yours!" A series of bone-chilling chuckles followed this. "It's your call!" Then silence. I started hallucinating just then. Cacti broke out in feverish grins, blood dripping down from sparkling fangs. Saw pieces of the desert floor crack and separate. From the cracks came whispering voices and reaching hands. One of the hands was skeletal and decomposing. Another was a massive wolf's paw, a green beady eye peeking out from the crack. The sky seemed to take shape over my head, and I felt like I was running through a snow globe, a black dome over my head. The voices began to speak again, but in hushed, disorganized whispers. "Mariel fever came tiptoeing through with a meat cleaver. Mariel window can't beat, may creep in, no one knows." "Shut up!" I could hear the wolves behind me grunting and barking. The sky rippled like water. There was a realization that something was piecing itself together in my path, but I was blinded by the moon's reflective glare. I then struck the window into the Mariel motel. I rebounded off the glass and I fell in a heap. Behind me, a pack of giant wolves were fast approaching over the horizon. The very earth trembled under my hands. This time they were going to kill me. The window was slightly ajar, the warm air from the hallway teasing my face. I grasped the windowsill and tore the window up on its track and clambered inside. On the carpet, I tried to push the window back down. It wouldn't budge. I hung all my weight on the thing, but it remained where it was. I even stepped back and swung the heel of my shoe down on the windowpane. Outside, the wolves howled and whined. They were less than a few miles away, and I couldn't stop them from entering my mind. "The Mariel window can't be closed. What may creep in, no one knows." I turned to run, but stopped. The hallway was different than the last time I saw it. The wallpaper hung in faded tatters, revealing the rotting plywood beneath. The carpet was pulled up from the ground in some places, and a few of the doors were masked with a foul mold, which seemed to grow before my eyes. After 10 to 15 minutes of running, I heard the shatter of glass behind me and the heavy thumps of my wolves gaining entry. Although I wasn't in my physical body, I was still feeling the influence of the fever, squeezing at my brain with its claw-like fingers. It seemed to go on and off like a light switch. 1 second the hallway would be spinning in front of me in a nauseous blur, and the next I would be thinking clearly and stepping lively. At one instant the doors began to ooze off the walls like a dripping paint, and I saw eyes sprout up in their places. They were the eyes of the wolves, blinking with recession on the wallpaper. They followed me like the eyes of a painting. Then the fever would fall off me like a wet towel and the doors would be back where they belonged. The hallway grew worse as I continued past door 200. There was a place where the ceiling had completely caved in, wires hanging out of the gaping hole like dead snakes. A light fixture lay at my feet, its bulb still flickering with life. Not far from that was a gaping trench in the ground, deeper than what my eyes could see. Far behind me I heard the sound of tearing carpet and a high-pitched howl. The doors appeared to hang crooked in their frames, growing moldy beards. The lights dimmed above my head, and there was one instance where I navigated through pitch black, the wallpaper ribbons brushing against me as cold fingertips. Then I came to door 319, and I stopped. This door was not covered in fungi like the others. This door was situated correctly in its frame, and it looked brand new. It was also slightly ajar, sunlight creeping in lazily across the carpet. I reached for the doorknob and swung it open. The bright afternoon sun greeted me. "Remember," a voice whispered from behind me. I stepped through the doorway and I was in the woods. I looked around with my hands over my eyes for shade. I remember that forest, and well, I used to hike through there a lot as a boy, pretending that I was a skilled hunter on the prowl for game. I would pick out a good-sized tree branch to be my rifle and slink my way through the foliage silent as a fox. Remember, that all flooded back to me like a surge of icy cold water. I was only 8 at the time, pretending to be a hunter on the trail of a wild beast. I would dart behind trees, stalking invisible deer or the occasional grizzly bear. I called myself Creepin' Red, I murmured under my breath, the greatest hunter this side of the Amazon. I watched an 8-year-old boy flit past a set of trees to my right. Suddenly, I knew exactly when I was. "Watch out, kid, watch out!" I leapt out for him, but he couldn't hear or see me. 8-year-old Red dodged behind a tree, his rifle close to his chest. His mop of hair hung comically over his eyes, and his little boots were coated in fresh mud. The boy sprang out from behind the tree and skipped across the clearing. He rounded a thick screen of bushes and sod. The boy immediately cried out in surprise, and I knew that Urine was currently spotting his coveralls. I ran up next to my past self and looked into the eyes of the beast. I too screamed. An adult male wolf sat on his haunches only yards from the boy. There's a deep gash across his neck, probably from a scuffle with another wolf. Blood had pooled around his body, staining the dead grass a sickening crimson. He growled at the boy in warning, spittle mixed with blood dripping off its muzzle. He tried to leap at the boy, but was only able to fall over onto its side, chest heaving. His black eyes stared up at us, teeth bared, a dying groan collecting in its throat. The boy backed up, watching the wolf with wide eyes, his mouth hung open in awe. The wolf made one last attempt to get up, and was able to crouch on its haunches again. It growled angrily, tightening into a ball. Its eyes watched the boy as its paws dug into the earth. It gave off a soft bark, fresh blood trickling down its chest. Muscles flexed beneath its coat, his lips pulled back to reveal pink teeth. I knew what was coming next, so I tried to pull the boy away, but my hands passed right through him. I could only watch and relive the scene. Yet, I didn't close my eyes. The wolf sprang at the boy and he screeched, falling over onto his butt. The wolf fell on the kid, its breath filling his face. Its wet fur weighed down the boy's body as claws tore open his coveralls and dug into his soft flesh. Wolf's jaws went for the boy's throat, but he thought fast. He brought the heavy tree branch up to his face, guarding his neck. The wolf fell away onto its side, noticeably weaker. It had already spent its remaining stores of energy. Like clockwork, the boy brought the butt end of his branch up and out in a swooping arc. It struck the wolf across the cranium. The injured wolf tried to claw its way across the clearing, whining in crippled desperation. "No, let it be, Red. Please let it be." The wolf ended its escape in a panting heap, eyes glazed and tongue lolling out of its jaw. The boy stood over the dying beast, mouth pulled back in an angry grimace. He held his branch high over his head, his coveralls hanging in tatters. I saw the fury and victory in my own eyes. Saw firsthand the atrocious cruelty emitting off me as I brought the branch down. Came down on the wolf's rib cage, its entire body twanging fiercely. Cried again, but made no attempt to defend itself. The wolf rested its head on the soft soil, eyelids fluttering. The boy bellowed his battle cry and crunched the wolf's skull with the wooden staff. The wolf let out one prolonged groan, and we watched its chest deflate like a punctured balloon. Its paw twitched twice before it fell still. The boy dropped the staff at his feet, watching us kill with glassy eyes. The scrapes on his chest were forgotten as the kid got on his knees to hold the wolf's still paw. It was a long time before the first tear trickled off his chin, and that was followed by a rocking sob. One hand absently patted the wolf's flank. I sat down next to myself, inspecting the dead wolf. It looked so fragile and innocent there in the woods. It looked at peace. My eyes traced the animal's skull, and I noticed the tag clipped to its ear. I crawled closer and examined the small device punched into its left ear. It was maybe only a few centimeters long, and was as wide as my biggest fingernail. The sun shone off its metallic surface, and I could faintly make out something stamped across it. Even after putting my nose inches from the wolf's snout, the words stamped on the tag were blurry. "Try to remember," the voice muttered. I shut my eyes tight. In my mind I saw a capital M, but the rest of the name was a black blur. Then a lowercase a stood out in the barrage of mental images. That was followed by a hyphen and a capitalized R. I didn't even have to find the rest of the code to know what I was dealing with. "Oh God. Oh no," I gasped. The blur on the tag focused before my eyes. M-A-R-I-A-L. A code.
It's a radio tag, I thought conclusively. It's a tracking transmitter for keeping tabs on wildlife. I didn't know what it was when I was 8. I thought it said, Mariel, I cried. There was a howl from just behind me, and I spun around. In the clearing stood a scrawny naked man with a black wolf's head on its shoulders. He was grinning at me, and I saw that it had human teeth. Its eyes weren't green marbles, but they were blue, just like mine. The thing held out a thin hand which held a fever plant by its soiled roots. Hello, Red. Long time no see, the thing said with my voice. I remembered what Jimmy and Stephen had said the other day in the diner. They said they'd heard a voice speaking to them in the desert, and its name was Mariel. Who are you? I asked cautiously. I peeked behind my shoulder to see that the wolf and the boy were gone. Mariel, it said simply. Its wolf head nodded sincerely at me, and I spotted the silver radio tag in its ear. I also noticed the open wound in its head, inflicted by the branch. One side of its snout was caked with dry blood. What are you? I challenged the creature. A memory whose door you could never close, it said. I looked back at the door floating freely in the air. I could make out the hallway, where the overhead light was casting flickering shadows on the wall. There was a howl rising from the depths of the Mariel motel like a ghost wind. The wolves were closer than ever. I turned back to Mariel and saw that it had gotten even closer to me. I let you in, didn't I? I asked the entity. The first night, you snuck in through the window behind me. I've always been here, Red. You just let the wolves in. It cackled, sending chills up and down my spine. You talk to my friends. When you're stoned, I'm free to come and go as I please, it explained. I found your friends and decided to have a little fun. Unfortunately, I can never remain in your place for more than a moment. I found the road for you, but was sucked back here as punishment. What do you mean, your hallway? These are my memories, I announced. I agree these halls are yours. I'm not staying here anymore. I'm getting out. We're swapping places, Red, it declared. I'm going to climb out the window on the other side, and I'll be able to feel and see and talk. You'll stay here, locked behind this door like you tried to do to me. It spun around swiftly and lunged for the door. I followed suit, sprinting alongside Mariel to the only exit. Mariel reached the door first and got halfway out the doorway. I was able to place a hand on its shoulder and I wrenched it back in. It was thrown easily out into the forest, where it fell head over heels into the thick underbrush. I grasped the doorknob and went to swing the door shut behind me, but an icy hand caught me on my elbow. It pulled me backward, and I was being ripped out of the hallway. I caught myself before I fell onto my back, but Mariel was already out in the hall, swinging the door shut. Bye, Red, it cried, and the door latched shut in my face. I beat at the door with my balled-up fists. I tried for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. I turned to ram the middle of the door with my shoulders, but it remained solid in its frame. Mariel was already on its way to the end of the hallway, near the door 5823. It'd tear open the window and place itself behind my eyes, posing as me, and using my vocal cords as its own. I gave it a name that day in the forest, just like the plant. Once it had its name, it could manifest itself into that thing. You can try and stop him, a familiar voice spoke from behind the door. He's already close to the window. He knows all the shortcuts. That was followed by an onslaught of childish laughter. How? I asked the voices. These are your memories. You can choose what can be forgotten, and what can be remembered. Do you want to remember? Remember what? I asked. The wild wolf you killed in the woods by your father's farm. Do you want to remember the way you cried, or the way you felt like you were the one truly defeated that beautiful summer day? Tears flowed freely down my cheeks. Yes, I said softly. Do you want to remember how you strung the dead beast over your back and carried him all the way home? Yes, I sobbed. Do you want to remember how your father helped you bury it in the fields? Or how your father looked at you after the corpse was buried? How he held your shoulders as you cried? Yes, of course I do, I answered. There was a soft click as the door creaked open. I stared into the hallway through my tears, a smile creeping across my face. I stepped out of the forest and heard the door slam shut behind me with a rattling crash. I turned to see that the door was gone. There was only a bare wall, where a repressed memory had once been stored. You're deathly afraid of wolves, a voice concluded promptly. Yeah, I stopped at the sound of heavy panting. I turned to see a pack of wolves bounding up the hallway, jaws clashing. I turned and ran from their revolving green eyes, head thumping and my heart pounding. I could feel the effects of the fever coursing through my bloodstream. Time seemed to slow and thin out. Colors seemed to come and go, and tears fell off and on down my face. Inside the maze of my mind, Part 3. Doors passed me in a constant blur, the mold splintering and warping the wood. The numbers were no longer legible, and their black paint trickled onto the carpet like dripping mascara. The lights had extinguished almost completely, leaving me in a dark hell, the howls of the wolves growing closer and closer. There was a guttural snarl from directly behind me, and something nudged against my lower back. I shrieked in surprise as the beast leapt at my legs. I was able to jump against one of the doors, and the wolf struck a wall. The door split down the middle from my weight, and I fell into the memory in a cloud of dust and splinters. I struck pavement, the glow of a streetlight spotting my face. The wolves were now flooding through the gaping doorway, running at me in a giant mass of teeth and black fur. I got shakily to my feet. I realized that I was standing in a New York street in the middle of the night. The street did look familiar to me, but the particular memory escaped me. My entire college career was spent there in Manhattan, with a drafty apartment uptown with faulty locks, and a low-grade job at a dry cleaner a few blocks away from the school. I spotted a dark alleyway and raced down it, the wolves quickly on my heels. The fever kicked in again, and I supported my weight against a brick wall. The world seemed to spin and color-swapped places with each other. My feet were once more sinking into the earth, my heart riddled with static. No, not now. I was able to duck behind a stack of splintered crates, watching the mouth of the alley through the slats. The fever ran its course inside me, turning my stomach and blurring my vision. I would have to let it run out of steam before making my escape. I just hoped the alley wasn't a dead end. The wolves were entering the alley with a slow caution. They grouped together on the empty street, seeming to communicate with their eyes. There were easily 12 of them, all as large as automobiles. They couldn't see me behind the crates, but they had strong eyes for the darkness. One of the wolves crept into the alley, head low to the ground, eyes surveying every garbage can and every piece of litter. Its tail was between its legs as its massive paws tested each step it took. Then the rest of the pack crawled their way in, sniffing eagerly at the air, tongues dangling from their thin lips. My mind cleared, my vision sharpened, and the alley stopped spinning. I sprang out from behind the crates and darted down the alley, the wolves immediately responding. I heard the crates smash and the trash cans ring as they were trampled. The wolves had grown in number, and many were on the rooftops or climbing the very walls to get at me. After making a sharp turn in the alley, I glimpsed a door to my left, and I tore it open, leaping inside. I fell onto stiff carpet, my foot kicking at the door. Out in the alley, wolves were just rounding the bend, pointing me out at once. I saw black shapes drop from the sky, and furry hulks emerge from the concrete like giant ghosts. There were too many to count now. The toe of my shoe caught the edge of the door, and I was able to swing it shut. It closed over the alley scene, but I didn't hear the door latch. I crawled for it, my nails cutting into the floor, my throat closing up like a clogged drain. A paw knocked the door open, sending it into my unprotected face. I recoiled, stars exploding in front of my eyes. Black fur and claws burst from the opening just as I fell into the door with all my dead weight. It swung back and latched into its frame, whimpers and scratches instantly meeting me from the other end. I got back to my feet, holding my bleeding nose and blinking all the tears from my eyes. That was when I got a good look at my surroundings. I was back in the run-down hallway, its overhead lights still flickering, its wallpaper still peeling, and its fungus still spreading. I'm back on track, I thought victoriously, listening to the whines of the wolves. You've still got work to do. What can I do? Go to the window and then you'll see. I nodded, blood caking the lower half of my face. I was able to read one door which bore the fading number 976. I was getting closer, but I had a long journey ahead of me. Soon I began to see gray stalks reaching out from the rips and tears in the carpet. I watched as vines snaked out of the ground, curling up the walls. The fever was seeding and thriving in this environment. I stepped over them, clutching them, and even hurtled over entire colonies, which clung to the ceiling like grotesque tentacles. In some places they punched through the walls, their vines reaching for other vines. Some stalks grew as high as the ceiling, piercing the light fixtures above and distinguishing their glow. I passed door 2390 and door 3481, the hallway a jungle of towering stalks, which looked more like massive tree trunks, and pointing thorns, which were growing to the size of my thumbs. Then I started to hear voices out there that weren't in my head. These voices came from outside. Red? Oh God, Red, is that you? It was Steven, echoing along the hallway. Yes, Steve, I'm here, my vocal cords retorted. No, that's not me. That plant messed me up. I thought I was going crazy or something, Steven said with much exhaustion and distress. Come on, I found the car, my voice responded. No, don't go with him, Steven, I screamed. You did? There was relief in his voice. Thank God. It's so dark out here, man. I hear that, it said back. I heard Steven take the thing's hand, and there was the sound of boots crunching. Steven was breathing heavily, his voice raspy and dying. Did you find Jimmy, Red? A long pause. No. There were more heaving breaths, and Steven let out a retching cough. But I found you, Mariel said. What do you... You doing?" Stephen gasped. I heard his heavy footsteps as he retreated, screaming. Mariel took off after him. There was a high-pitched laugh and a blood-curdling scream before the sounds died completely. As I passed door 5000, my mind was racing as fast as my legs. Not a tear fell. There was only the scolding anger pressing against the inside of my chest. Then, like a welcoming beacon on a lighthouse, I spotted the window directly ahead of me. It was only a small postage stamp, gray vines growing everywhere but its translucent eye. "Hurry, hurry," the voices sang in unison. I tore through the thick brush, thorns stabbing into me, the very ground drooping under every step. In one place my foot tore completely through the frayed carpet and I fell on my butt, wrenching my leg from the black void beyond the hallway. The entire place was coming down, the tiles in the ceiling tearing loose, crashing into the jungle of fever plants like white boulders. The lights above my head exploded in a spray of glass and sparks. One of the doors to my left cracked along its metal and another was thrown off its frame. The fever consumed the door, vines pulling it into its churning stomach. The ceiling caved in, dust and debris filled the air. The walls buckled, doors cracked and split, and the fever grew like a plump sponge under a running faucet. I was no longer running across carpet. The window called me and pulled me closer. Beyond the glass was absolute darkness, so I knew Mariel was still wandering the desert somewhere. In the window I could see my bloody reflection fighting its way across a valley of weeds. My hands reached for the glass, red fingers splayed, vines coiled around my legs, pulling me back. My fingertips grazed it, my reflection a thrashing blur in a sea of gray. The vines loosened around my ankles and I fell forward into the window, my cheeks pressed against the cool glass. I noticed the window was closed this time. I tried to yank it upward, but it wouldn't budge. "Occupied," a voice said with a laugh. "You can't get through and someone or something is on the other side." "Then how can I get through?" I asked with much difficulty. It felt as if my lungs were being punctured with burning cattle prods. "You can't." Peered through the foggy window to see Stephen's Ford Explorer floating in the darkness. My hand rose up into view to grasp for the handle of the passenger door. The door swung open, and the thing inside my body had to jump back as not to be struck. Out of the passenger seat came a smiling Jimmy, pale and plastered in mud. Jimmy's arms wrapped around my shoulders, and his face buried itself in my chest. "Thank God, Red," Jimmy's voice said from all around me. It seemed to creep through the cracks in my hull like a cloud of gas. "I'm glad I found you, Jim," the alien said. I realized then that I would never feel the breeze on my face again, or fill my lungs with fresh air. I would never smoke another cigarette, or kiss a girl on the lips. I wouldn't laugh, or kick back my heels and close my eyes. "Break it," a voice responded casually. The fever came alive under me like a gasping mouth, chomping into my feet with its razor-sharp teeth. There was very real pain, brilliant pain. The fever's thorns crunched into my ankles, and I knew my bones were snapping like twigs. Blood poured between my legs in thin ribbons spotting my pants, splattering the window. "Break it!" I smashed my fist against the window, and the plant swallowed me up to my hip. My pelvis snapped, hot pain coursing up my back. I lost all sensation in my waist and stomach, my chest splitting open. Hot blood sprayed my face as I banged my fist a second time. "What are you doing, Red?" Mariel asked me from the other side of the window. "Just what do you think you're doing in there?" "I buried you," I said. "Do it, Red," a voice pressed behind me. I recognized my own voice as an 8-year-old boy. I couldn't feel its teeth anymore, or hear Mariel's rambling words. As I raised my fist for the last time, there was bliss. My eyes closed, and all my remaining strength went to my arm, into that last swing. The fever screamed as I struck the glass. The window cracked down the middle, and everything fell silent. The fever stopped chewing me. Mariel stopped screaming, and the voices were silent. I saw that the window had gone dark, a spiderweb crack connecting each of its corners. I fell backward, but 2 hands caught me under my arms. I was aware of being pulled out of the fever, debris sprinkling my face. I could hear the carpet ripping as the floor gave way. The ceiling moaned as it struggled to stay intact. Wood was splintering, lights popping, and the fever fell into the void. There was a tremendous crash, which I knew to be the walls buckling. Then I heard the subtle creak of a door opening. The door stood open before me. Sunlight danced on the other side, and the hands under my arms pushed me toward it. My hands reached in. The warmth filled my eyes, my face. "It's just a new drug, I guess," Jimmy concluded, and the door snapped shut behind me. Epilogue. As black as the desert at night. Red blinked in the heavy sunlight. "Come on, we've got a long way to go," the boy said from beside him. The boy had a dead wolf strung across his back, its head flopping doll-like over his shoulder blades. The silver tag was still clipped to the wolf's ear. The boy looked up at the man, face smeared in sweat and blood. "Where are we going?" Red asked, but he already knew the answer. "We're going to a funeral," the boy replied simply. "We have to start digging before sunset." The kid nodded his head up at the country road, which seemed to stretch on for the length of eternity. Red thought they wouldn't make the funeral that night, or any night for that matter. Now it was about the journey. How can this exist? How? If the hallway and the... He stopped and patted his thighs with astonishment. The boy laughed. Yes, you still have your legs. But how? We're only memories, Red. Just shadows, the boy said with a sigh. Then he lifted his head and smiled up at the man. Maybe we'll meet some people along the way, and maybe we can see Daddy again. He lowered his head and readjusted the weight on his shoulders. I don't know. How did this memory remain, though? All the others disappeared with the hallway and the wreckage. Red responded. He tried to keep up with the boy. It wasn't in the hallway, the kid said. You chose to take it out and keep it. You were able to conceal it, and when your mind started to crumble, you had somewhere to fall back on, to keep yourself going. So is this real, or is it a dream, or the afterlife? Red asked. The woods of his childhood surrounded them from both sides. Red realized there was nowhere else he'd rather be. Does it matter? The boy asked with a grin. Hey, let me help you carry that, Red said, pointing at the dead animal. I don't know, the kid said, uneasily digging his fingers into its mangy fur. We'll take turns carrying the weight, Red replied, holding out his arms. It's mine to deal with, too. It's mine to bury. The boy nodded, and he lifted the wolf off his shoulders. Red held the dead animal, glancing down at its glassy eyes. He once related those dead eyes to fear, but now there was a different sensation. It was a feeling of completion and promise. He could stare into those black holes and not even flinch. He pitied the creature, but also respected it. Red held the wolf close, cradling him with love. You said we might meet others on this road? Red said. What did you mean? The boy looked up at him, and his eyes sparkled. As if to answer his question, there was the roar of an engine behind them. They both turned to see a thick cloud of dust racing up the road. Through the screen, Red saw a glint of light reflected off the windshield of a car. He heard the blare of a horn and the screech of the car's tires in the gravel. Then Fred made out the bobbing hula girl on the inside dashboard, moving like a praying serpent. Red laughed, running at the car with the boy at his heels. The wolf lay in Red's arms like a slumbering child, head bobbing much like the hula girl. A howl rose up from the treetops like a sweeping wind, and died out as fast as it had come.
Tune in next time for Red Cave Podcast, Volume 23. Until then, guard your soul.